host, Zen Garcia.
Is set in the legal record of Barrow County, so it can be found there. People can look it up for themselves and read and study and decide for themselves with regard to the whole question and topic.
Yeah, that's amazing, dude. I was praying for you. Found out.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I knew that you were going through some of this stuff, and that there was going to be a second round on this, and it was like that he was appealing and all that stuff. I was like, oh brother, man,
Right.
that's no fun. I know you were prepared for it and ready to go, but it's no fun. And to see it all finally thrown out, that's really awesome, man.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy, and again, to be able to move on, because even though I wasn't really stressing it hardcore, it's still something that weighs upon you, being
Sure.
sued for $15,000 in
Yeah.
a court of law over something that you're still not certain with regard to judges, and then the whole New World Order. I mean, do they want to come out against me and bring out whatever they're going to bring out? And so I was glad to finally have it be done with.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that just happened, just like this last week.
Yeah, this December 3rd is when they sent out the papers. I received them like December 6th or 7th, something like that, and it was we were supposed to try the final appeal case in Superior Court before Judge Mingledorf this past Monday, December 16th at 1 p.m. And so, yeah, it is all done, and can move on now. So I'm glad.
Woohoo!
Yeah, woohoo! Good
Right.
news on both fronts, huh?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, for anybody that's interested in checking out what happened with us over in South Africa, you can go to my YouTube channel. I just recently posted several videos, behind the scenes videos, on our progress out there, and just couldn't be happier and excited to be back in the saddle again here. Also, I'm still actually a little jet lagged, which is kind of amazing for me, because I typically don't get jet lag because I don't have like a normal sleeping schedule anyway.
Right.
Man, I guess because it was nonstop go, and just like I was, always maintaining a high level of energy, and I don't know what it is, but ever since I've been back home, I've been like like drooling
That's
on
a
my.
long journey. How
Oh,
long did it
man.
take you?
Yeah, well, I split it up
Yeah.
with the holdover in London, and that's
Right on.
man, that's the way to go if you're gonna do something like that. Because it was pretty much like 11-hour flight. It's like 10. It was between 9 and 11 hours on each leg, and I had 11-hour holdover in London, so I could sleep for a good several hours, in a hotel room or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. Ever since I came back home, I'm like, oh man, I can't get my head back in the game again. But and like I'm a little scattered right now because literally within a second of going live, I was trying to get the YouTube going, and my camera's not working. I'm like,
Oh, no.
but here we are. We're about ready to jump back in. I'm trying to remember where we left off. I know we dipped our toe in the Book of Enoch, but I don't recall actually really starting it. We
Yeah,
went
no. I
6,
think
right?
we will begin it this evening. But it's so funny that looking at the globe, you would fly all the way to London, to go to South Africa. It's just it's so strange. But then when you look at it on the AE map, then it all kind of makes sense.
Well, I did get some good video out the window. Of course, it was a night flight, so you don't really see anything. And I had a window seat, but so I was flying into Cape Town. Was it Cape Town or London? I think it was Cape Town. Yeah, it was Cape Town. So I saw the sunrise, and it was actually a really beautiful shot. so you have this like hard black flat line, and then you have this somewhat of a dome-shaped halo as the light was beginning to enter, and just sort of like almost a rainbow color right on the horizon, accentuating the flatness. And I'm looking at the on-screen display, and it says we're at 36,000 feet. I'm looking out that window. I'm like, yeah, you're on crack if you're seeing a curve.
Right.
There's no curve there.
Right.
And I shot it. I got a really good shot of it with my iPhone. It's completely flat. So there was something that I was listening to our show that we did, the last one, and you were reading from the I think it was the Targum, and it said something about grabbing a stone for light in the Ark. Do you remember that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was the gold that was given to Adam, which was part of what would be the prophetic fulfillment later, the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. But a large piece of gold was to provide light. And that's what they used.
That I do remember that in, I think it was the Book of Adam and Eve.
Right, exactly.
Talking about the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and it was the gold that illuminated the Cave of Treasures. Is that correct?
Right.
And so the Targum was backing that up.
Right, exactly.
Interesting. I posted a video today on Facebook. It was called "Were the Pyramids Built Before the Flood?" ? Have you seen that video before? It's interesting, and Doug Woodward, right?
Yes.
He's got a book out called Rebooting the Bible.
Right.
And in that, he's making a really strong case for the Septuagint over the Masoretic text, and showing, and I'm certainly aware that there's some major differences, even in the Genesis book that I published, the Genesis and the Synchronized Biblically Endorsed Extra Biblical Texts. In that book, I have Genesis in the King James and the Septuagint side by side, because there's some notable differences.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah, and primarily in the lineages, it adds like 100 years to several of the post-flood guys leading up to Abraham. Because I think it's in the Masoretic text, it says that they were like, I don't know, like 35 years of age when they begat so and so, but in the Septuagint, it's like, no, it's like 135 years. And when you add back in the hundreds to all these people, I mean, it shifts the timeline well over 600 years, like 650 something years, and then there's other additions, so you end up with like 1,000. And we've talked about this before. Where are we on the timeline?
Yes, exactly.
And the video, it's on my Facebook page. Let me see if I can share it for those who are watching on YouTube. Apologize, my camera's not working. I don't know what the deal is with that, but anyway, they can look this up on YouTube. Again, the title is "Were the Pyramids Built Before the Flood? Masoretic Text versus Original Hebrew." Oh, by the way, speaking of YouTube, we're still here.
Yeah, and amazing, huh?
Yeah.
Right.
I was a bit concerned about that while I'd never bothered to even look at it while I was in South Africa. And of course, the sweeping changes were supposed to begin on December 10th. Of course, it may be a gradual rollout as far as what they're doing, but
right.
I'm just happy to still be here. Happy to see that my channel's still here and that my videos are there, and
absolutely,
my count looks like it's still there. So praise God for that, and
praise God.
Favor that it continues. But so if you could check that video out, there's a number of things in it that I do disagree with, that the person who created that video talks about, especially as it concerns the Melchizedek. Joshua, the Targum, some rabbinic commentaries and stuff, point blank tell you that Melchizedek that Abraham encountered after the Genesis 14 war was Shem.
Right.
But if the if the Septuagint timeline is correct, then that couldn't be. Shem was dead 500 years before Abraham. And of course, they provide no answer for who Melchizedek is, other than to say that, well, based on what you read in Hebrews, they not having any genealogy and no father and mother, that it has to be Yeshua. And I've always had a problem with that. Because no text supports that.
Right.
That's a massive assumption with no supporting text anywhere. But also because then you'd have a pre-incarnate, incarnate Yeshua ruling and reigning a geographic location for an extended period of time.
Right. Right.
So if it's not Yeshua and it's not Shem, then who could it be? And there's no other candidates that, if we consider it the Melchizedekan order that dates back to Adam, who has no father or mother. He came from dirt. That's why there's no genealogy. There's no explanation for who the Melchizedek is there. But I'll say, that whole timeline issue certainly opens up a can of worms.
Yes.
And certainly would require me to change all of my timeline charts, because everything that I've done has been based off the King James Bible, which comes from the Masoretic text, and Bishop Usher and Ken Johnson and everybody else that goes off of that timeline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the books that I recently wrote, The Ancient Prophecies of Christ, goes into great detail of that 5,500-year prophecy.
Yeah.
Yeah, found in the Gospel of Nicodemus, the first book of Adam and Eve. Another text called the Angel Abaddon, the Angel of Death, the Cave of Treasures, and so a number of sources citing that particular prophecy. And I really just don't know how to conclude it with what we've been taught with regard to the 6,000 years, and so how much has been added, subtracted, minus, I still have to look into, and I think, what Doug has brought forth from the Septuagint is of great interest with regard to that particular prophecy.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by that 5,500 years things. It comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
In,
right.
Various ancient texts, and again, I don't know what to make of this, because it seems like it's just a huge tangled mess that's going to require a lot to try to untangle.
Right.
I don't buy the Melchizedek deal that this guy talks about. He also talks about the Great Pyramids, and he says there's no evidence of flood damage. But Dr. Robert Schoch, who's somebody I've actually met and did a conference with, his sort of claim to fame was finding that there was water damage done to Giza, specifically the Sphinx. But he talks about the whole Giza Plateau. So I'm of the opinion that the Great Pyramid was built by the House of Shem, based on the prophecy that was given to, I think it was given to Adam about the flood, and that there were two monuments that were built. And to me, it fits the description of the Isaiah 19 monument that's in the center, and at the in the center and the border of Egypt. Well, it's right there on the dividing line between northern Egypt and southern Egypt. So it's in the center of Egypt and on the border of Egypt, and there's no other monument there.
Right.
That, at least in my mind, that fits the Isaiah 19 prophecy. So I don't know, lots of interesting things to think about. If you haven't seen it, you probably should check out that video. And anybody listening, if you're interested, you could check it out as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. But I'm in full agreement with you with regard to Shem being Melchizedek. There's numerous texts. Even here in the writings of Abraham, it says, Shem ruled in the city of Shalom, and he was called Melchizedek, for he reigned as king under his father Noah, and was priest of the Most High God.
What text is that?
This is the writings of Abraham, which speak about Abraham being led when he was 13 years old to the tent of Shem and Noah, and that he remained there for 39 years and was brought up in the Melchizedekian priesthood, and taught in the in the same ways that Noah had brought Shem up.
Yeah, when I was putting together some of my timeline charts, I was pointing out that that exact same story. Of course, that's related in quite a bit of detail in the Book of Joshua,
Yes.
and that he was there during the construction and confounding of the languages at the Tower of Babel.
Right.
Because he was on the run from Nimrod, and
Yes.
he was hiding out there. He was
Right.
being preserved there.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know what to make of it. Like anything else, I'm willing to say, okay, well, if it's wrong, it's wrong, and trash all the old work and put out some new stuff. But there's still problems with even this new information that I'm struggling with, and a lot of things don't make sense, specifically the Melchizedek thing. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, I think there's lots to consider. I mean, the more we learn, the more we realize there's still so much yet to come to terms with, and I think that is one of the interesting things with regard to doing the parallel studies like we've been doing on the Book of Genesis and other aspects of what we've read in the first 6 chapters of the Creation Week, but studying the Perkti Rabbi Eleazar, the legends of the Jews, the traditions of the Jews, the Chronicles of Jeremiah, the Assatir, all these different books that have a parallel accounting of the scriptures and the lives of the Old Testament patriarchs, and you get greater detail on all those different stories. And so when you're looking at a specific topic, like for instance here with Melchizedek and Shem, then you can read in those particular texts numerous passages which affirm that, and then looking to Jasher and Jubilees and other sources, you get greater insight, and especially with the Targum, because I do find that it elaborates in great detail on a lot of subjects which seem to be ambiguous within the King James.
Yeah, and one of the things that the guy who made that video talked about is the addition of Canaan, Canam, I think it's Canam, Canaan or Canam. Anyway, it's an offspring of Arphaxad, who is included in the Septuagint, but not in the Masoretic text. I think that's the way it goes. But Jubilees mentions him. He's said to have found writings of the Watchers
right
after the flood, and it says that he sinned because of it and hid it from Noah, and that's all we get information.
Right.
But he's missing from the Genesis account of genealogies, but I think he shows up in either Matthew or Luke's. I forget. I'm gonna have to go look at that stuff up again. But it's interesting because you have extended timelines and added people and missing people, and just stuff gets pretty jacked up really quickly. And as I understand it, it goes back to Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the 1st century, I believe, and didn't want to believe in Yeshua as the Messiah, and he was vying for Bar Kokhba as the Messiah, and so he's like, well, we can't have that, and so he starts jacking around the text to throw everything off regarding Yeshua. And there was something else I posted about that. I'm gonna have to look it up. I don't remember. Oh yeah, in the Book of Enoch, I posted this. Let me share this for those who are watching on YouTube here. Enoch chapter 46 and 48. I was just looking over some things, and I said, why did the Jews eventually, i.e. after the events of the 1st century, reject the Book of Enoch? To find the answers to that question, perhaps we might ask this one. Who do you imagine Enoch is talking about here, if not the Messiah of the New Testament? And Enoch, this was in response to something I saw Dave Murphy post, because he's
anti-Christ, right?
Christ, and others that do the same. But
Yeah.
yet they'll accept the Book of Enoch when it comes to
Cosmology.
enclosed world cosmology, and even the Nephilim.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They'll love Enoch for cosmology and Nephilim, but wait a minute. Enoch 46, 1 and 2 says, "There I beheld the Ancient of Days, whose head was like white wool, and
Yes.
with him another, whose countenance resembled that of a man. His
Mm-hmm.
countenance was full of grace, like that of one of the holy angels. Then I inquired of one of the angels who went with me, and who showed me every secret thing concerning this Son of Man, who he was, whence he was, and why he accompanied the Ancient of Days. He answered and said to me, This is the Son of Man, to whom righteousness belongs, with whom righteousness has dwelt, and who will reveal all the treasures of that which is concealed. For the Lord of spirits has chosen him, and his portion has surpassed all before the Lord of spirits in everlasting righteousness." In Enoch 48, picking up in verse 2. In that hour was the Son of Man invoked before the Lord of spirits, and his name in the presence of the Ancient of Days. Before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of heaven were formed, his name was invoked in the presence of the Lord of spirits. A support shall he be for the righteous and the holy to lean upon without falling, and he shall be the light of nations. He shall be the hope of those whose hearts are troubled. All who dwell on earth shall fall down and worship before him, shall bless and glorify him, and sing praises to the name of the Lord of spirits. Therefore the elect and the concealed one existed in his presence before the world was created and forever. So it sounds a lot like John chapter 1.
Exactly.
In his presence he existed, and has revealed to the saints and to the righteous the wisdom of the Lord of spirits, for he has preserved the lot of the righteous, because they have hated and rejected this world of iniquity, and have detested all its works and ways in the name of the Lord of spirits. For in his name shall they be preserved, and his will shall be their life. In those days shall the kings of the earth and the mighty men who have gained the world by their achievements become humble in countenance. For in the day of their anxiety and trouble their souls shall not be saved, and they shall be in subjection to those whom I have chosen. I will cast them like hay into the fire, and like lead into the water. Thus shall they burn in the presence of the righteous, and sink in the presence of the holy, nor shall a tenth part of them be found. But in the day of their trouble the world shall obtain tranquility. In his presence shall they fall, and not be raised up again, nor shall there be anyone to take them out of his hands and to lift them up, for they have denied the Lord of spirits and his Messiah. The name of the Lord of spirits shall be blessed. And there are other similar references in the Book of Enoch. So for those who reject the New Testament Messiah known as Yeshua, who repeatedly referred to himself as the Son of Man more than any other title, who then is this character that Enoch is talking about?
Exactly.
Enoch's a very messianic book, so you can understand why.
Certainly.
Yeah, the Hebrews, they love the Book of Enoch up till verse.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm joined here with Zen Garcia. And right before the break, I was reading from the Book of Enoch, chapters 46 and 48, talking about this individual known as the Son of Man, who is there with the Ancient of Days and who is referred to as his Messiah. So there are many such references, not just in those two chapters, but all through the Book of Enoch. So you can see why, after the first century, this book that was favored by the Hebrews and quoted quite extensively by the authors of Scripture and referenced in different ways, all of a sudden fell out of favor. And then after about 160 AD, when Julius Africanus shows up and says, "Yeah, I don't really think the Genesis 6 is talking about angels there," slowly it began to fall out of favor with Christians as well. But you can see why these things happen. This book was very favored, and all of a sudden it fell out of favor, and was in canon. It was considered canon, and then it pops out of canon. And then, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find I think it was 6 copies found in Cave 4 alone. So as we get into the Book of Enoch, we'll see that this is a very powerful book. And the first chapter, the first few verses, the first chapter of the book say, hey, this isn't for this generation, but for a remote future generation that will live in the day of tribulation. So, yeah. You were going to say something before the break, Zen, about in terms of it being messianic?
Yes, several. As you said, there's so much in the Book of Enoch which brings it forth as being messianic and prophetic, and like the whole story of the Annival Farm parable, which you and I have talked about. I mean, it covers everything with regard to the coming of Yeshua as well. And from chapter 61, verse 8, it says, "And the Lord of spirits placed the elect one on the throne of glory, and he shall judge all the works of the holy above in the heaven, and in the balance shall their deeds be weighed. And when he shall lift up his countenance to judge their secret ways according to the word of the name of the Lord of spirits, and their path according to the way of the righteous judgment of the Lord of spirits, then shall they all with one voice speak and bless and glorify and extol and sanctify the name of the Lord of spirits." So, I mean, there's so much, and I agree with you with regard to better understanding the whole Genesis 6 and what it's speaking about with the sons of God as the angels of heaven interdicting themselves into the affairs of humanity. There's no singular text which brings greater elaboration on that entire scenario, and that leading from the time of Yard up to the time of Noah, that whole period, as to the what was going on, what was happening, the miscegenation, the hybrid children and bloodlines, the giants, and I mean so much going on, and yet without this text, a lot of that remains ambiguous. And so in my opinion, the powers that be, in trying to hide who they are as the enemy, that in attacking this book and making it disappear, they were able to hide and to keep so much of what is the mystical aspect of what the legends and the ancient mysteries, able to hide all of that. Even the giants, because the giants are found interwoven all throughout Scripture, and not understanding this, you can't make sense of the connections with all the rest of it. Even a lot of people realize, oh yeah, the story of David and Goliath, but they don't many may not understand the connections to Genesis 6, and also to the the decree to wipe out every man, woman, and child in the land of Canaan who was of this particular hybrid bloodline. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. While you were talking, I was looking online for an edition that we can read from. Of course, I have it in print. I know you do as well. I think I was trying to see which translation this was of the Book of Enoch. You could go to book-ofenoch.com was the first one that popped up when I just did a quick Google search. Looking at it just at a glance here in the introduction, it's actually got a pretty extensive introduction and talking about the history of the Book of Enoch and who considered it scripture and who didn't, and who quoted it and who considered it authoritative. It's got quite an extensive list of various characters throughout history. It looks like this is the Lawrence edition, Archbishop Lawrence. I published the R.H. Charles edition. That's the one that I published in my Genesis and the Synchronized Biblically Endorsed Extra Biblical Text volume. So I'm going to go ahead and read from this Lawrence one. I'm not as familiar with the Lawrence translation. Are you familiar with the Lawrence versus the Charles, or any differences between the two?
I am. I'm familiar with both, and there's not great, and as far as the 3,000 L's, there's a slight variation on that. But yeah, they pretty much follow together. There's just some word variation, but I like both of them, and I like doing a parallel study. And
yeah,
so
that would be cool to have I wonder if anybody's ever done a parallel R.H. Charles and Lawrence side-by-side translation. Are you aware of anybody that might have done something like that?
No, what we
you?
Yeah, we released the collected works of Enoch. We released both translations, the Charles and the Lawrence, and you can go to reluctantmessenger.com, and both of them are found on that website as well.
Did you release them as a parallel or just in separate editions?
No, it's in separate, not in parallel. That would have been, I think, somebody that does that and takes the time to do that, that would be a really awesome parallel study to bring forth.
Yeah, I think it would. There's another one I have here on my bookshelf, The Complete Books of Enoch by Dr. A. Nyland. I think she's a woman. The author, Dr. Nyland, is a woman. Have you seen her edition of Enoch?
I don't believe so. I know there's another one, the Yahweh Restored edition, the Sacred Name Restored edition as well. And then there's one that Steve Quell put out, the Book of Enoch, the Sky Tripper or something like that.
I also have the Ancient Book of Enoch by Dr. Ken Johnson, his edition, and the Joseph B. Lumpkin edition, which I'm pretty sure he's using R.H. Charles.
Right, yeah. Most of them are using R.H. Charles or the Richard Lawrence.
What I liked about Dr. Nyland's version is she puts quite a bit of commentary throughout it. And
nice. I love the commentary. Footnotes.
Yeah, links it to, she pulls out various other texts that, go along with it. And what really freaked me out, and it was in the Apocalypse of Abraham, because let's see here. I'm looking at what chapter is this? Chapter 8 of Enoch talks about Azazel and how he taught humans to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, and so forth, and the use of anatomy and whatnot. And in her footnote on Azazel, let me just save it to when we get to chapter 8, because that might be a good time to really unpack that. You want to we'll go to start at the beginning here, chapter 1.
Sounds good.
You know, it could take us another 14 hours to get to chapter 8.
Right.
The way we were going before. But okay, so I'll read from this again. If anybody wants to follow along, I've got it up on YouTube here. But if you're listening on the radio, it's book-ofenoch.com. That's where I'm reading from, and it appears to me that this is the Lawrence translation. So, Enoch chapter 1, the word of the blessing of Enoch, how he blessed the elect and the righteous who were to exist in the time of trouble, rejecting all the wicked and ungodly. Enoch, a righteous man who was with God, answered and spoke with his while his eyes were open, and while he saw a holy vision in the heavens, and the angels showed me. You know, that's in the R.H. Charles one. It says, talks about in the time of tribulation, that it was not for this generation, but for a remote one that will live in the time of tribulation. So right off the bat, I'm noticing a difference in that first verse, but
Right.
Because the Charles one makes it really sound like it's for us.
Right.
You know, like for this generation, which makes sense to me, just because of everything that's happening, right? Just like biblical cosmology. Why is it coming out now, you know, in the 21st century of all times? Because
I fully agree.
You know, you have this massive increase in UFO activity going back to 1947 or Roswell, and from that point forward, and you know, it's like almost every year it's exponentially increasing, and you know, something's coming. And you know, book like this, you know, of course, the scriptures, the canonized scriptures, do a really good job too. But Enoch is a slam dunk, home run, touchdown. You know,
Absolutely.
Totally exposing all of that as complete and utter nonsense and impossible, given the cosmology that it describes here.
Right.
Verse 2. From them I heard all things and understood what I saw, that which will not take place in this generation, but in a generation which is to succeed at a distant period on account of the elect. Okay, so it gets a little closer to what I'm familiar with there. Upon their account I spoke and conversed with him who will go forth from his habitation, the holy and mighty one, the God of the world, who will hereafter tread upon Mount Sinai, appear with his hosts, and be manifested in the strength of his power from heaven. All shall be afraid, and the watchers be terrified. Great fear and trembling shall seize them, even to the ends of the earth. The lofty mountains shall be troubled, and the exalted hills depressed, melting like a honeycomb in the flame. The earth shall be immerged, and all things which are in it perish, while judgment shall come upon all, even upon all the righteous. But to them shall he give peace. He shall preserve the elect, and towards them exercise clemency. Then shall all belong to God, be happy and blessed, and the splendor of the Godhead shall illuminate them. That's chapter 1. Anything you'd like to add, or?
I'll just.
Do you have the Charles in front of you?
Yeah, I do. I'll read the Charles.
Yeah, let's do that.
Just so people can know.
Yeah, great.
All right. The R.H. Charles. The words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. And he took up his parable and said, Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the angels showed me, and from them I heard everything, and from them I understood as I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come. Concerning the elect I said, and took up my parable concerning them. The Holy Great One will come forth from his dwelling, and the eternal God will tread upon the earth, even on Mount Sinai, and appear from his camp, and appear in the strength of his might from the heaven of heavens. And all shall be smitten with fear, and the watchers shall quake, and great fear and trembling shall seize them unto the ends of the earth. And the high mountains shall be shaken, and the high hills shall be made low, and shall melt like wax before the flame. And the earth shall be wholly rent in sunder, and all that is upon the earth shall perish. And there shall be a judgment upon all men. but with the righteous he will make peace, and will protect the elect, and mercy shall be upon them, and they shall all belong to God, and they shall be prospered, and they shall all be blessed, and he will help them all, and light shall appear unto them, and he will make peace with them. And behold, he cometh with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all, and to destroy all the ungodly, and to convict all flesh of all the works of their ungodliness which they have ungodly committed, and of all the hard things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Uh, against him. And that's the end of chapter 1.
Yes, that's interesting. In the Charles version, it extends chapter 1. I wonder if, let me look at chapter 2. Okay, so chapter 2, that's weird. Yeah, that's quite different, this translation.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 2 is really short. It looks like it's only one verse. And that is what they have in chapter 2 here, you had in chapter 1, or Charles did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the divisions are different.
Yeah, chapter 3 looks different too. Interesting. Well, yeah, that's good. Maybe we'll do this. We'll just kind of alternate.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
compare
that's a good idea.
and see. Something that popped out at when you were reading the Charles version. Who's to be removed?
Yeah, the wicked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's backed up by scripture. Who goes first?
Right. The tares. Right. Exactly.
The whole left behind theology is just completely jacked up. Pre-trib rapture. Sorry, guys. It's just not supported by the canonized text, nor is it in the Book of Enoch. And as you pointed out earlier, we'll get to it eventually, as towards the end of the book, the animal apocalypse.
Right.
Sort of the Animal Farm version of history. And that's what's fascinating to me is Book of Enoch gives you from the creation of Adam all the way to the very end. And it does it as an allegory. It tells the whole story. And in chapter 1, even in both the Charles and the Lawrence version, it says that he will appear on Mount Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, because that fits right along with Revelation,
Well, the Moses, Mount Sinai, if we were to believe that Enoch is a pre-flood text,
mm-hmm.
it's telling you that he's going to appear on Mount Sinai. Moses is something like 800 years after the flood or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. And one last thing with regard, it's interesting that in the Assater, the secret book of Moses, it speaks about Adam being given 5 manuscripts before he was cast out of paradise. And one of those is the Book of the Wars of the Lord, another the Book of Signs, and another called the Book of the Generations of Man, which I see parallels connected to what is found in the Book of Enoch with the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, and then the whole animal farm parable fits in with the generations of man. So
very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if there's anything else here in chapter 1 maybe to talk about. We have the first mention of the watchers there. It's interesting that they shall be afraid and terrified. And the context of that too is when he appears on Mount Sinai. I never caught that before. Verse 4, who will hereafter tread upon Mount Sinai, appear with his host, and be manifested in the strength of his power from heaven. All shall be afraid, and the watchers be terrified. The watchers be terrified at his coming on Mount Sinai. That's interesting to me, especially if it's a prophecy of Mount Sinai in the context of Moses.
Or at the end of days when Yeshua returns again and splits it.
Well, he's splitting. He's splitting the Mount of Olives.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Mount Sinai would be connected to Moshe being given the Torah. Yeah, absolutely.
I never see. I've how many times we read the Book of Enoch, right?
Right.
It's just,
Hmm.
right now, it's just jumping out at me.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really. Are you aware of any other texts that might talk about the watchers being terrified at Mount Sinai?
No. No. But I'm gonna look into the different parallel accounts to see if I can dig up something further on that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see here. Chapter 2 in the Lawrence says, "Behold, he comes with 10,000." Let me switch this for people on YouTube. There we go. "Behold, he comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon them and destroy the wicked and reprove all the carnal for everything which the sinful and ungodly have done and committed against him." And in the footnote on here, it says this is the verse that's quoted by Jude.
Right.
This is 14 and 15.
Yes.
And Charles had that in chapter 1.
1.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll go over to chapter 3 here in the Lawrence. It says, "All who are in the heavens know what is transacted there. They know that the heavenly luminaries change not their paths, that each rises and sets regularly, every one at its proper period, without transgressing the commands which they have received. They behold the earth and understand what is there transacted, from the beginning to the end of it. They see that every work of God is invariable in the period of its appearance. They behold summer and winter, perceiving that the whole earth is full of water, and that the cloud and the dew and the rain refresh it." That's where chapter 3 ends. What's your chapter 2 and 3 say?
Okay. Chapter 2 is, "Observe ye everything that takes place in the heaven, how they do not change their orbits, and the luminaries which are in the heaven, how they all rise and set in order, each in its season, and transgress not against their appointed order. Behold ye the earth, and give heed to the things which take place upon it, from first to last, how steadfast they are, how none of the things upon earth change, but all the works of God appear to you. Behold, the summer and the winter, how the whole earth is filled with water, and clouds and dew, and rain lie upon it." Chapter 3. "Observe and see how in the winter all the trees seem as though they had withered and shed all their leaves, except 14 trees, which do not lose their foliage, but retain the old foliage from 2 to 3 years till the new comes."
Yes, that's chapter 4 in Lawrence. It says, "They consider and behold every tree, how it appears to wither, and every leaf to fall off, except of 14 trees, which are not deciduous." I don't know what that word, "which wait from the old to the appearance of the new leaf for 2 or 3 winters." That's just kind of a cryptic,
Hmm.
kind of random verse there. It's interesting, though, looking at chapter 3 in the context of chapter 2. He's coming with 10,000 saints to execute judgment upon them, to destroy the wicked and reprove all the carnal for everything which the sinful have done. And in that context, it says, all who are in the heavens know what is transacted there. They know that the heavenly luminaries change not their paths. And so, yet Jude talks about wandering stars.
Hmm.
So it appears to me that, and we'll get into it later in the Book of Enoch, that there's a class of angels known as the heavenly luminaries, that what we call stars up in the sky are in fact sentient beings. And this is actually confirmed by the canonized text in a number of places throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, where the stars and the constellations are interchangeably referred to as angels and the hosts of heaven, and the hosts of heaven also interchangeably being a reference for the stars and constellations as well as the armies of God.
Yes.
And so, when it says that the armies of God follow him who's on the white horse there in the book of Revelation, You know, a lot of people think, and I used to be one of them when I was in the pre-trib rapture camp. Oh, you know, we're going to get raptured up there. We're going to have the marriage supper of the Lamb. We're going to hang out, party in heaven. You know, while God, the wife beater, you know, jacks up his wife, you know, Israel for 7 years, and then we're all going to come back and follow Jesus on a horse. You know, so many people teach that it's going to be the Christians riding back on the horses. It doesn't say that. It says the armies of heaven follow behind him. And nowhere is a bride considered an army, or even in the army. You know, that the whole idea is completely ridiculous. And when it says that, you know, the armies of heaven follow him, well, the armies of heaven are the hosts of heaven, and the hosts of heaven are the stars of heaven.
Yes, exactly.
So when it talks about all the stars falling, well, you know, the angels are going to file in behind them. In chapter 12 says that the serpent grabs 1/3 of the stars and throws them down to earth. So that's where we get the idea that you know, 1/3 of the angels went with Satan.
Right.
So you know, those are coming down, and then when the sky splits open and Yeshua comes on the horse, you know, the armies follow behind him, and the armies are the hosts of heaven, and the hosts of heaven are the angels, and he's the captain of the heavenly hosts. So. Yes. You know, again, pre-trib rapture and dispensation theology and all that really jacks up the text completely. But in the Lawrence version here in chapter 3, it says the heavenly luminaries change not their paths; they know what paths are supposed to be on. Oh, right.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia, on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, for the second hour of the broadcast. Wow, this is flying by as usual. I'm joined with Zen Garcia, and we are talking about the Book of Enoch. Right before the break, I was talking about the issue of the heavenly luminaries and how all throughout Scripture the word star and angel is used interchangeably, as well as the hosts of heaven, interchangeable for the stars, constellations, and the armies of heaven. And we're pointing out in the Lawrence translation of Enoch, it says the heavenly luminaries change not their paths, that each rises and sets regularly, every one at its proper period, without transgressing the commands which they have received. Later, as we get through this, we'll see that there's a special place of horrible judgment for those that do transgress the paths. And what I was about to say right before we went to break is that the reason why they can't move was, well, we see in Genesis that the stars are there for signs and for seasons, but I would contend that they also, part of the signs part of it, I would say, they also serve the purpose of telling the gospel. And
Yes.
there's several books, if you people listening haven't heard of before, Gospel and the Stars by Joseph Seiss and Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bullinger. Both really cool books. And another book I got by Andrew Gabriel Roth, I haven't really gone through it as in depth, Wheel of the Stars. It looks like it sort of follows the same concept, that they're telling a story. And if memory serves, it was in, I don't remember if it was Bullinger or Seiss. I think it was Seiss, maybe both of them, talk about how there are different houses of the constellations, and they're grouped in certain ways. And just like the four Gospels, you have four houses of three,
Right.
that each sort of tell the gospel story in their own way. Just like, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all telling the same story, but there's little nuances and little things, that each one has that, is different from the other ones. And so if the stars are up there telling a story that is about God's entire plan, then, if the stars deviate and move and change, then they mess up the story, which is why, Yahuwah gets so mad about that.
Right.
Anything you wanted to share on the concept of the gospel and the stars, or anything that we've covered so far?
Yeah, I believe that, the reason and the purpose for the Mazzaroth is to also, like all of creation, tell the story of the coming of Christ and how redemption, preservation, and salvation is through him. Even the story, even like what we talk about with the seed line wars, it's also found in the Gemini, the twins, and the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. All of that plays out in similarity. And so, yeah, I absolutely do believe that the story of the Mazzaroth is the story, of the fall of humanity, how we need to be redeemed, and Christ's war against Satan, the dragon, and how he tries to usurp the same thing of the, trying to overthrow, and 1/3 of the angels of the Most High being led astray. That it's all the same narrative when you really understand the deeper aspect of it. It's all telling the same story of what is the core tenets of our faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the book of Jude, it talks about the wandering stars that are reserved for judgment. And when I'm looking at that, I'm going, wait a minute, why does God? Because people say, well, that's the planets, and they do, because the word wandering there is planetes. That's the word from which we get our word planet. But in every case, it's talking about planeo, planetes, all of those, various versions of the word all have to do with deception, deceit, wandering from truth. over and over and over again. It's talking about wandering from truth. So when we say planet Earth, for instance, we're saying the wandering, deceptive Earth that takes us away from the truth of God's word.
Yeah, that's so cool.
But it says that these wandering stars are reserved for judgment. And if we're to say wandering stars are planets, why does God need to judge a rock? Why does he need to judge gas balls? He judges sentient beings that transgress his law. So
exactly.
And that scripture doesn't really make any sense if we're just thinking about planets. But if we're thinking about sentient beings, and I think it was, I'm trying to remember if it was the first or second Guardians of the Galaxy movie, where the main bad guy was a planet. It was a sentient planet. I think it was Kurt Russell, I believe, played the character, Ego. And at one point they even show the planet at a distance, and it had like a big face, like the planet itself looked like a head with a face on it. But he would manifest himself in humanoid form on Earth, and he took a human wife, and together they made a child, and he was the Rocket Man guy there, Chris Pratt's character in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's like, wait a minute, I've heard that story before.
Mm-hmm.
Wandering stars that came down to Earth and mated with women and created the gods of antiquity, the men of renown, things of that. And isn't it interesting that what Jude calls wandering stars, what we now call planets, just so happen to be named after sentient beings that the ancients worshipped as gods?
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating, and again, it shows all that whole story of the connection with Lucifer's rebellion, his wanting to be like the Most High, to establish his throne above the stars and the clouds of God, to be in the sides of the north on the mount of the congregation. It is all connected to even what we see in the deception with the calendars and the cosmology, the holidays. So many people are involved in idolatry, as we talked about earlier this evening in the show that I did with Dr. Pigeon and Jessica. But so much deception all the way around, and Satan declared it, even going all the way back with his intent that he wanted to divert worship to himself and to be like the Most High. And I think that's really the purpose of the New World Order, is to establish him as this, the false god, and to divert that worship to him.
Yeah, you just mentioned you've done a series of shows with Dr. Pigeon. He intrigues me, he fascinates me, and he frustrates me.
Yeah.
I mean, how could a guy that smart and who has translated so many books and published them, and the Book of Enoch especially, how can he not see what Enoch is saying? I mean, I understand the arguments that he tries to make, where he in my mind, does an amazing mental gymnastics tap routine, like he was debating you on flat Earth, and what he does with the canonized text, as so many others do. He's not the only one. I mean, so many others try to grossly mangle firmament into meaning air, gas in the vacuum of space, and circle into globe, and what have you. And so we're used to that, but Enoch doesn't give you that kind of latitude. I mean, especially chapter 72 through 83, the course of the heavenly luminaries, is complete and utter total gibberish when you have the heliocentric globular Earth concept of cosmology. I mean, it makes no sense at all. I mean, have you challenged him on that? I haven't listened to your shows that you've done with him, but
we did the whole debate together.
But that was mostly you were dealing, as I recall, it seemed like you were dealing more with the canonized text,
right? And we were, but again, when somebody's just stuck in their position and they're unwilling to examine the other aspects of truth with regard to cosmology, what do? You can't. It's like the whole thing. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, and so it's like with other people, even with Danny Faulkner
Mhm.
and your position with him. I mean, he's unwilling to examine it, and so what do? You can't force it, and I'm not going to try to
Yeah,
beat it into his head.
I just don't. I mean, no, of course, I published the Book of Enoch also when
hmm
of the standard cosmological worldview, and didn't see it. And frankly, I'm like shaking my head, going, "Look, I don't know what to do with these chapters. They don't make any sense to me."
right,
You
yeah,
know,
that
I,
was my position as well.
yeah, I mean, I loved Enoch for of course, the study of the Nephilim and all that stuff. I mean, it's just like this incredible slam dunk for explaining Genesis 6 in tremendous detail, and as Steve Quayle likes to say, the understanding of Genesis 6 with the angelic view now is the Rosetta Stone for understanding all of Scripture and indeed history.
Right,
You
right,
know, frankly, and Enoch is the book that gives us this tremendous amount of detail.
right,
So all
absolutely,
these guys, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, L.A. Marzulli, and all these other guys that love Enoch for that
right,
are all like, oh, no, 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 no. What,
yes,
don't I mean, what is it, chapter 86, or I forget the chapter, but one of the later
the
chapters.
lofty roof.
Well, yeah, I mean, it tells you like 4 or 5 times
hmm
that the lofty roof, which is a hard structure, opened up, and Genesis tells you the windows of heaven, windows are put into hard,
Yes,
solid structures, opened, and it like 4 or 5 times it says that it filled that enclosure.
hmm
Now, of course, again, I published it myself and didn't see it.
right,
But, once you just look at it, like, there it is. I mean, and
yeah,
of course, you have that whole section, chapter like 10 or 12 chapters on the course of the heavenly luminaries, which is total gibberish in the standard model cosmology.
yes,
And I mean, I might give somebody like L.A. Marzulli or, Tom Horner, maybe some of these guys a pass, but Dr. Pigeon, I can't give him a pass on that one.
he's Hebrew scholar, yeah,
Yeah, he's Captain Hebrew Scholar.
right,
He's like, he created the Sefer, just this massive gargantuan work of art, and publication, and claiming to be a Hebrew scholar. And it's like, dude, how can you read this and not see what it's saying?
yeah. Yeah, and again, it goes back Steve Quell, Tom Horn, all those guys. I mean, even with the guy he does shows with, I forget his name right now, but
Derek Gilbert.
no, the other guy that did the Holy See with him,
Oh,
Timothy Alberino.
yeah.
Yeah, because I was doing shows with Timothy until
Mm-hmm.
he found out that this was my position and quickly cut me off and never spoke to me again. But I I just I pray for them and I respect them all and
Yeah, me
but
too.
I don't understand how they don't see it either. I mean, because if you just look at and examine the text um, with open-mindedness, and there's no other way to decipher it, no other way to explain it. It does not make sense in a heliocentric worldview. You have 14 chapters where it speaks about the motions of the heavenly luminaries, not one passage attributed to the motions of the earth. You have the whole story of Joshua's long day,
Mm-hmm.
the sun and the moon. He's given authority over, not the earth and the moon. I mean, and then the story of Isaiah 38, the sundial, sun going back 10 degrees on the sun. None of that stuff can be explained or make sense of in any other model than the way that we explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can easily understand it when you open yourself to that possibility, but yet nobody wants to. And a lot of people firmly do believe into and buy into NASA and, all the work supposedly that they have put out and that they've done. even though it's crazy because you see in Bart Cybril's the funny thing happened on the way to the moon, how they tried to use the window of the lunar module
Right.
to fake and to hoax that the Earth is a globe or spherical in shape. I mean, if that doesn't throw out their credibility, what does?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, so I don't get it.
Yeah. Good point. Well, let's continue here in the Book of Enoch. I'll do a screen share here again. Chapter 3, 4. Let's see. Yeah, so the chapters are different in the Charles. So you read about the trees already, so I read
Right.
that. Let's see. I guess we're on 5, and that'll take us. I'll do 5 and 6 because that'll get us right into. Well, at least in the Charles version. I don't know where it does here in the
Right.
Lawrence version, but 6 of Enoch is the parallel to Genesis 6. So, chapter 5 in the Lawrence translation. Again, they consider the days of summer, and the sun is upon it at its very beginning, while you seek for a covered and shady spot on account of the burning sun, while the earth is scorched up with fervid heat, and you become incapable of walking either upon the ground or upon the rocks in consequence of that heat. Chapter 6. They consider how the trees, when they put forth their green leaves, become covered and produce fruit, understanding everything and knowing that he who lives forever does all these things for you, that the works at the beginning of every existing year, that all his works are subservient to him and invariable, yet as God has appointed, so are all things brought to pass. They see, too, how the seas and the rivers together complete their respective operations, but you endure not patiently, nor fulfill the commandments of the Lord, but you transgress and calumniate. I'm not sure what that calumniate or whatever. His greatness and malignant are the words in your polluted mouths against his majesty. Ye withered in heart, no peace shall be to you. Therefore your days shall you curse, and the years of your lives shall perish. Perpetual execration shall be multiplied, and you shall not obtain mercy. In those days shall you resign your peace with the eternal maledictions of all righteous, and sinners shall perpetually execrate you, with the ungodly. The elect shall possess light, joy, and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. But you, ye unholy, shall be accursed. Then shall wisdom be given to the elect, all of whom shall live and not again transgress by impiety or pride, but shall humble themselves, possessing prudence, and shall not repeat transgression. They shall not be condemned the whole period of their lives, nor die in torment and indignation, but the sum of their days shall be completed, and they shall grow old in peace, while the years of their happiness shall be multiplied in joy and with peace forever, the whole duration of their existence. That's chapter 6. Where does he get to the angels here? It must be chapter 7. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and read the parallel of that? I'll say the Lawrence translation's hard to read. It's like worse than King James. It's very cryptic, like the way it's structured.
Yeah, some of the words are older too, huh?
Yeah, I'm probably butchering them. Like I said, I'm still jet lagged. Forgive me, folks. I'm kind of brain dead this evening, but man.
Yeah. Chapter 4.
Okay.
And again, observe ye the days of summer, how the sun is above the earth over against it, and you seek shade and shelter by reason of the heat of the sun, and the earth also burns with growing heat. And so you cannot tread on the earth or on a rock by reason of its heat. Chapter 5. Observe ye how the trees cover themselves with green leaves and bear fruit. Wherefore give ye heed and know with regard to all his works, and recognize how he that liveth forever hath made them so. And all his works go on thus from year to year forever, and all the tasks which they accomplish for him, and their tasks change not. But according as God hath ordained, so is it done. And behold, how the sea and the rivers in like manner accomplish and change not their tasks from his commandment. But ye Ye have not been steadfast, nor done the commandments of the Lord, but ye have turned away and spoken proud and hard words with your impure mouths against his greatness. O ye hard hearted, ye shall find no peace. Therefore shall ye execrate your days, and the years of your life shall perish, and the years of your destruction shall be multiplied in eternal execration, and ye shall find no mercy. In those days ye shall make your names an eternal execration unto all the righteous, and by you shall all who curse, and all the sinners and godless shall imprecate by you, and for you the godless there shall be a curse, and all the shall rejoice, and there shall be forgiveness of sins, and every mercy and peace and forbearance. There shall be salvation unto them, a goodly light. And for all of you sinners, there shall be no salvation, but on you all shall abide a curse. But for the elect, there shall be light and joy and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. And then there shall be bestowed upon the elect wisdom, and they shall all live and never again sin, either through ungodliness or through pride. But they who are wise shall be humble, and they shall not again transgress, nor shall they sin all the days of their life, nor shall they die of the divine anger or wrath, but they shall complete the numbers of days of their life, and their lives shall be increased in peace, and the years of their joy shall be multiplied in eternal gladness and peace all the days of their life.
I actually had to look up the word execrate. It's not a word that I'm used to.
What is it?
It means to detest utterly, abhor, abominate, to curse, imprecate, evil upon, damn, denounce, to utter curses. Execrate.
All right.
And yeah, to express great loathing for is another definition for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was surprised that the Charles version also had that in there. And I'm like, yeah, I got to look this up.
Right.
So in the Charles version, it's chapter 6, which parallels Genesis chapter 6.
Right.
As we get into the angels. In the Lawrence version, it's in chapter 7, and it's considered section 2. So the Book of Enoch is historically divided up into sections with like different themes for each section. And so section 2 certainly appears to be where we get into the issue of Genesis 6. So in the Lawrence version, it's chapter 7. In the Charles, is chapter 6. I'll read it here in the Lawrence. It happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days, that daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful. And when the angels, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored of them, saying to each other, come, let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of men, and let us beget children. Then their leader, Samjaza, said to them, I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise, and that I alone shall suffer for so grievous a crime. But they answered him and said, we all swear and bind ourselves by mutual execrations. Now it's using execrations again. It's implications, I think, or imprecations in the Charles, I believe, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Mutual imprecation. That we will not change our intention, but execute our projected undertaking. And they swore all together and all bound themselves by mutual execrations. Their whole number was 200, who descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Armon. Okay, Armon being Herman. I haven't heard Ardis before. Is that in the Charles also? Ardis? Ardis?
It says no, Mount Hermon here.
Okay, so Armon being a derivative spelling of Herman. That mountain, therefore, was called Armon because they had sworn upon it and bound themselves by mutual execrations. Now I just read that execrations was expressions of loathing, curses. That's kind of bizarre. Anyway, 9, verse 9. These are the names of their chiefs. Semjaza, who was their leader. Oh boy, I'm going to butcher these names here. Arakabaramil, Arakabaramil, Kabil, Tamil, Ramuel, Danel, Askiel, Sarakniel, Asiel, Armors, Batral, Anain, Zavib, Zem, Saviel, Artiel, Turel, Yam, Yael, Arazel. These are the prefects of the 200 angels, and the remainder were all with them. Then they took wives, each choosing for himself whom they began to approach and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. And the women conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was 300 cubits. These devoured all which the labor of men produced until it became impossible to feed them, when they turned themselves against men and were devoured.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm joined with Zen Garcia. We're going through the Book of Enoch, and I almost made it through chapter 7. There's a few verses left here in the Lawrence translation of Enoch. I'm going to back up to verse 10 and continue from there. Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and dividing of roots and trees. And the women conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all which the labor of men produced, until it became impossible to feed them, when they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood. Then the earth reproved the unrighteous. And I'll stop there.
All right. And from the R.H. Charles. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semyaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swore they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Yared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are their names. These are the names of their leaders: Semyaza, their leader; Arkabal, Ramiel, Kokabel, Tamnel, Ramnel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Berechiel, Azazel, Armaros, Batarel, Tamlel, Ananel, Zachlel, Sakpiel, Satarel, Turel, Jomjael, Sariel. These are their chiefs of tens. Chapter 7. And all the others together with him took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. And imprecation means a spoken curse.
Oh, so it would be similar to the execrate.
Mm-hmm.
So I always thought of it more like a vow, but
That's what I thought too.
It gave a mutual curse. That's kind of, well, I mean, it certainly did bring a curse, because
Right.
Semjaza, he's like, look, I have a feeling I'm going to go through with it and you guys aren't, and I'm going to be the one that has to pay for this. And they identified it as a great sin.
Right.
And basically everybody I always took it as everybody, nope, we're all in, and they swore an oath to, everybody go through with it. But this is saying they swore a curse. Well, I mean, doing what they did certainly did bring a curse upon them. Now, verse 9. So this is interesting because this is where the Charles and the Lawrence catch up. I think what Lawrence tried to do is keep the sections separated, because in yours, in the Charles version, it begins with the angels cohabitating with women, and he's lumped it all into a section. Lawrence did section 7, where you got it split, right? You go from 6 to 7,
right?
Unless your section 2 begins in chapter 6. Is that maybe how yours is divided?
It seems to be, the Genesis 6 part is equal to chapter 6.
Yeah.
And then they took wives of all which they chose. That moves into chapter 7.
Okay. So, yeah. All right. So, let me put the text back up on the screen. The names are slightly different. Of course, both doing our best, probably butchering them.
Right.
But you had, some pretty significantly different names in verse 9. And I'm looking at Dr. Nyland's. She also appears to be quoting from the Lawrence. Hers looks similar to my list. She has a footnote there. It says Aramaic texts have an earlier catalog of the Watchers' names, and it's also a derivation of them. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
What I found interesting, though, is, okay, they pick women for themselves to be wives, but first they start teaching them how to mess with plants,
right,
before they were able to conceive. Because it says, in verse 10, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees, and the woman conceiving brought forth giants in verse 11. So it appears through some sort of witchcraft and the use of roots and plants and things of that nature that they probably had to do something to be able to conceive. At least that's the way I see it here.
Yeah, well, again, it could be some kind of genetic type of something that made it, possible.
Prepares them for conception.
Right.
Now, the Charles version says that their stature was 3,000 ells. Dr. A. Nyland, as well as, she's, I guess, probably using the Lawrence here, cites it as 300 cubits.
Right.
Which I find interesting, that's the same dimension as the length of the ark.
Mm-hmm.
It was 300 cubits in length, which is roughly 450 feet. Somebody in the chat room was saying that 3,000 ells is 2.1 miles, I think they said. Well, Lawrence doesn't agree with that. Neither does Dr. A. Nyland. And I've read other things, too, as well, assigning the 3,000 ells to 300 cubits, which is still massive. 450-foot giants.
Right.
We think of that like, our brains can't even calculate that, conceive something like that. Although the Greeks had no problem with that. They called them the Titans.
Yes, exactly.
In fact, in the, I think it was Wrath of the Titans or Clash of the Titans, one of those movies, when they're resurrecting Kronos, they bring him back and they depict him as a 450-foot tall, massive giant. So, we have a hard time with it, but the ancients certainly didn't.
Right. And it seems, the stories, like even that of Og in the Book of Jasher, he was a very much larger stature.
So, of course, growing to such massive sizes, they were very hungry. You got to maintain that metabolism, so they start eating everything. Eating people, then they start, so this is where it appears that we see carnivores enter the scene.
Right.
The first time we see the eating of meat is by massive abominations, giants, entering the scene and eating up everything.
I agree.
And drinking their blood.
Right.
Any other comments you might have on those chapters?
No, I do agree with you. I think that is when the cannibalism and the drinking of blood and the eating of probably everything. They were trying to consume everything, so to appease their appetites. And so, yeah, I definitely see that this is where things got out of hand as far as consumption goes.
Well, and we see that also in the Numbers account, the Hebrew
Right.
spies going into the land, and it says, the land devours itself.
Right.
Because at first it describes these guys as men of great stature. They even said that they felt like grasshoppers by comparison, and
Right.
said that the land devours itself. Well, I mean, yeah. If you consider how big these guys were, and I don't have Doug Hamp's book in front of me, but in his book Corrupting the Image, he kind of breaks down what a diet might look like for somebody like Aga Bashan, for instance, and assuming about a 15-footer in that case. I forget how many. It was like dozens. It was dozens or hundreds. I think it was dozens of cheeseburgers and pizzas, and like just what he would have to take in terms of caloric intake, just to maintain his metabolism.
Right.
At rest. Never mind considering the dude was a warrior.
Right.
So, just to keep your heart beating, you got to consume so many calories. And, Doug was likening that to, cheeseburgers and pizzas and stuff, how many he would have to eat. It was quite a large number. But when I was looking at the text of the Book of Numbers, and it talks about the Hebrew spies bringing one cluster of grapes, and it took two and a pole, carrying this. When I was doing my research for my second book, Archon Invasion, and I just happened to be looking at that account there, Sheila brought in a bowl of grapes, and there was a good-sized cluster, a single cluster of grapes in that bowl. And so I was like, huh. So I went into the bathroom, and I held up the cluster of grapes to my head just to get a size comparison. And, the cluster of grapes that I had was pretty close to the size of my head. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. For scale purposes, I started to think, how big would these grapes have to be before I couldn't carry them myself? I would have to grab a buddy and a pole to make it work. And so I using 3D software, created a man with a size grapes, right beside his head. And I scaled the grapes up to the size that and weight that I figured it would have to be before I would need help carrying it. And when I did that and sized up a person with the head proportionate to the size of the grapes that I was scaling up, it came up to a minimum of 25, 26 feet tall.
Wow.
And I was looking, I'm like, wow, wait a minute. It looks to me like the size of the grapes that we're told about here gives you the scale of the giants. That you're looking at a minimum of 20-footer.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, considering the crops that couldn't have just grown naturally. There had to have been some kind of weirdness implemented there to get crops to grow of that large size as well. And, them feeding giants and giants living in that land, that perhaps even with the way that they were able to breed with these women, even though the Kebra Nagah says that they were born unnaturally and split open the navels of their mothers and came forth that way and killed their mothers in being born. Perhaps they used some other kind of incantation or magic or something of that nature to create crops of that large size as well.
Well, I mean, it makes sense that they would have to, maybe this is, we can understand the spirit behind GMOs.
Right.
For 5,000-6,000 years, depending on which timeline you want to go with, as we talked about at the beginning,
right. Yeah.
We had no problem eating tomatoes just the way they were. Tomatoes, whatever. Different foods are fine just the way they were. And all of a sudden, we got to genetically modify everything, and actually, I think we can go ahead and jump into chapter 8 because I want to talk about antimony. So that's where it's in the, I think maybe both translations might parallel each other at this point, but we are introduced to Azazel in Enoch chapter 8. So let me share the screen here. What do we got? 15 minutes left in the broadcast. Okay. Enoch chapter 8 in the Lawrence translation. Moreover, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, and of all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered. Now, the Lawrence translation doesn't use the word, but Charles uses antimony here. He taught antimony. Verse 2, impiety increased, fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. Amazarch taught all the sorcerers, the dividers of roots. Armors taught the solution of sorcery. Barkael taught the observers of the stars. Kabiel taught signs. Tamil taught astronomy. And Azaradel taught the motion of the moon. And men being destroyed cried out, and their voice reached to heaven. I'll stop there and let you read your version.
Okay. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cutting, Amoros the resolving of enchantments, Barakiel taught astrology, Kokobel the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arakiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. Chapter 9.
Okay, so antimony, the Charles version mentions antimony there regarding Azazel and what he taught and stuff like that. What caught my eye about that is I was reading something about bottled water, and how, if you leave a bottle of water in the car, for instance, in the summertime, you shouldn't drink it because the plastic starts leaching into the water. And one of the substances that is said to leach into the water is antimony. And I'm going, well, isn't that interesting? First of all, the fact that we're paying for water now,
right?
We got to drink it in bottles like that. That in and of itself is suspect. But combine it with the fact that one of the byproducts is antimony. A lot of things started to beg the question: have the Watchers been released? Mm-hmm. Because, and it is my contention, I believe that they have been. It may be a progressive release. I don't know if all 200 have been released, or if they're progressively being released. But if you look at what the Watchers in the Book of Enoch taught men to do, and you go back to the beginning of the 20th century and work your way forward, it's a pretty darn good match. Mm-hmm. For what these characters were teaching men to do. And the other thing I wanted to share real quick from Dr. A. Nyland's book was some of her footnotes on Azazel. Let's see, we got 10 minutes. We got 7 minutes. I won't be able to get through all of it. We might have to pick up on some of this next week. Of course, she makes the obvious connection to Leviticus chapter 16 and the Day of Atonement and the whole issue of the scapegoat. And that's one of the big proofs that I use for the authority of the Book of Enoch. Because if we believe that the scriptures, the canonized texts, were inspired by the Holy Spirit and written by men, then under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, we have some major references. And I'll go a step further. Moses spoke with God face to face as one speaks with a friend. So I'll take that a little bit further than inspiration and go to dictation. Hey, Moses is hanging up on the mountain with the Creator himself, and hey, Moses, you getting all this? Listen to what I'm telling you here. And when he gets instructions for the Moedim, the appointed times, the feast of God, and we get to the Day of Atonement, and we see that they cast lots, and it comes up either for Yahuwah or for, you'll see scapegoat in the King James, but it's Azazel. And when we get to, in the Charles version, I think it's Enoch chapter 15, that talks about all sin being ascribed to Azazel. And so that's where we get an understanding of what's going on with the Day of Atonement. If it came up for the scapegoat, the Israelites would tie a ribbon around its horn, lay their hands upon it, signifying like placing the sins of the nation upon the goat, and then send the goat out into the wilderness. Well, where are they sending it? They're sending it to Azazel. Why? Because Enoch said all sin had been ascribed to this character. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty huge. But what caught my attention was I had created, when I was writing Seed, going back to 2009 now, and have this encounter, my troops encounter Azazel in the cave of Dudiel. And, I was just using my mind, my imagination to create this character. And I wanted it to be like this real ugly beast, goat-like. So I came up with this hybrid creature that had like a goat head and a human torso and the lower torso of a dragon. So I created this in 3D, modeled it all out, thinking, hey, I just created something original here. There was nothing that inspired me to do that, no outside source. It was just something I came up with. But then I get this book by Dr. A. Nyland, and she writes on page 24 on her footnote on Azazel. She said, in the 1st to the 2nd century Jewish texts, the Apocalypse of Abraham, Azazel is portrayed as an unclean bird which came down upon the sacrifice prepared by Abraham. It describes Azazel as an evil spirit, a liar, and as an entity that brings troubles to humans who live wickedly. The Apocalypse of Abraham states that the wicked will decay in the belly of the cunning worm Azazel and be burned by the fire of Azazel's tongue. Azazel's appearance is described as a dragon with hands and feet like humans and having 6 wings on the right side and 6 wings on the left side of his back. I'm like, other than I have wings, I didn't have 6. I had, just 2 wings on his back. But described as a dragon and elsewhere described, as a goat. So apparently in the Apocalypse of Abraham, he's described very much the way I depicted it, and I never read that. I've never seen it anywhere. I was like, "Whoa, okay."
You should read that text. It is it's pretty profound.
The Apocalypse of Abraham.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, it's something I'll have to check out. Well, we've got looks like 5 minutes or so left of the broadcast. Did you have any other comments or 3 minutes? Any other comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I will make, since you're talking about Azazel, in the Apocalypse of Abraham, Azazel is the serpent in the garden that beguiles Eve, and it ascribes the seed of the evildoers, just as it in Isaiah 14, where it talks about Lucifer being the abominable branch. It ascribes Azazel as being the father of the evildoers, the wicked, the tares, and so that's one of the reasons why it is one of my favorite texts, because it goes through that whole seed line enmity between the seed of the woman, seed of the serpent, and connects the serpent, it being a dragon. As you said, that Azazel has feet and legs like a man, but yet wings like a dragon, and is described as a feathered serpent. And so there's that whole connection again. That's the Genesis 3 story.
That's interesting because so many different Hebrew texts have a different name for the serpent in the garden.
Right.
Samael, of course, we would say Satan.
Right.
You're saying that it was an Apocalypse of Abraham that said it was Azazel?
Yeah, Azazel, yes.
There are other names too. I can't think of it in my head, but I wonder. So it makes me wonder if they're actual names or if they're not.
Seem to be titles. Yeah, like Samael means the viper of God, the angel of death. Satan, we know, is the adversary. And even Semyaza means my name is Aza, which Azazel, is Aza plus El. And so it seems to be the same kind of thing.
Several people earlier in the chat room were asking about, what's the deal with these names ending in L? Is my understanding L is just is God, and
Right.
it's preceded by a word that means something of God.
Right. And they were all angels, and so they were all angels of God, sons of God, even before their fall. So,
Yeah, and that's something I would point out too, because some people get they get this idea in their mind that fallen angels are like a different breed of angel. And I say, no, look, especially when it comes to, I got Rh negative blood. Does that mean I'm unredeemable? Because I personally believe Rh negative entered the human genome as a result of the Genesis 6 experiment. I said, look, no, angels are angels, just like humans are humans. There are bad humans and there are good humans. And the bad humans are humans that chose to do something wrong. And fallen angels are just good angels who chose to do something wrong and then became bad angels as a result of that.
Exactly. Right.
They're not another breed of angel.
Right.
So, well, it looks like we got about 10 seconds left. Hey, Zen, this was awesome. Thanks so much for coming on again.
Always a pleasure, brother.
And
We'll catch you on my show next week.
Yep, next week on Zen's show, which is, what is that, the 26th? So, see you guys next week on Zen's show. Thank you guys so much.
Is that all?
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at Sacred Word.